What happens when the man who built a company from the ground up realizes he barely recognizes what it's become? Troy Jensen stared out the window of his office, drumming his fingers against the desk. He had busted his back for 20 years building these factories, 7 of them now across 3 states, making custom machinery parts for dozens of industries. It started with just him and a rented garage. Now, it was a multi-million-dollar business. But lately, complaints were stacking up. Delayed shipments, sloppy assembly, high employee turnover. He had trusted his managers to run things while he focused on expansion. Maybe too much. Troy's gut twisted. He couldn't rely on polished reports anymore. He had to see it with his own eyes. He called his assistant, a sharp woman named Felicia Langston. "Get me a disguise, something good. Wanna work the line at the Southbridge factory." Felicia didn't even blink. "Got it. Nobody there's ever met you in person, right?" "Not a single one," Troy said. "I barely even met the district manager. I always dealt with corporate." A week later, Troy looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize himself. His sandy blonde hair was dyed darker, his clean-shaven face now hidden under a scruffy beard. Worn jeans, steel-toe boots, a faded hoodie. He looked like any other guy trying to make a living. They gave him a fake name, Travis. At Southbridge, the place was humming with noise. Machines clanked, forklifts beeped, and workers moved like a busy ant colony. Troy's heart pounded as he walked in. It felt strange, walking into his own building like a stranger. The floor manager, a short, square-shouldered guy named Mike, greeted him with a quick nod. "You the new hire?" "Yeah, Travis," Troy said, offering a firm handshake. Mike barely glanced at him. "Good, we're short-handed." Troy nodded. He already knew from reports that turnover here was high. Mike handed him a battered hard hat and safety glasses. "You'll be on line 3. Talk to Corey, he's the team leader." Troy made his way over. Corey was a tall, wiry guy with sharp eyes and a permanent scowl. Troy introduced himself. Corey just grunted. "Grab that drill, watch what the others do, don't slow us down." Troy jumped in, mimicking the others. The work was tough, repetitive. Heavy parts, fast movements, tight deadlines. After an hour, sweat dripped into his eyes, his back ached. He respected the hell out of these workers. They weren't slacking, they were grinding. But it didn't take long for Troy to notice something that made his stomach knot. Near the end of the assembly line, a huge piece jammed. A young woman, maybe 19 or 20, named Ashley, tried to fix it. She struggled, clearly needing help. Corey barked, "Keep it moving." He waved at her impatiently. Ashley hesitated, then climbed onto the machine without shutting it down. Troy's breath caught in his throat. That was a massive safety violation. One wrong move, and she could lose a hand or worse. "Shouldn't we shut it off first?" Troy called out. Corey shot him a glare. "You want to finish this order or not, rookie? Stay in your lane." Troy clenched his fists. His mind raced. He couldn't blow his cover yet, but he also couldn't stand there and watch someone get hurt. A second later, the machine lurched, and Ashley stumbled back, barely catching herself. She looked shaken but unhurt. Corey just laughed. "See, fine, get back to work." Troy gritted his teeth and helped Ashley steady the part. She gave him a grateful look but said nothing. After the shift ended, Troy leaned against the lockers, exhausted and furious. He had seen enough for one day to know things were worse than he thought. And he wasn't leaving until he fixed it. Troy wiped the sweat from his forehead and followed the others out of the assembly hall. His muscles protested with every step. The factory air was thick and stale, heavy with the smell of oil and metal. He tried to stretch discreetly, not wanting to draw attention. The workers trudged toward a grimy break room stacked with battered vending machines and a scattering of plastic chairs. He grabbed a seat in the corner, keeping his head down. Conversations buzzed around him. Corey leaned against the wall, barking orders to a few workers about the next shift's quota. Troy noticed Ashley sitting alone at a table, staring blankly at a bruised apple she had pulled from her lunch bag. An older man with deep lines etched into his face, wearing a faded cap, dropped into the chair next to Troy. "First day?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. "Yes," Troy said, adjusting the fit of his hard hat. "Feels like it got hit by a truck." The man gave a short laugh. "You get used to it, or you don't. Name's Earl." "T. Travis," Troy said, catching himself. Earl nodded. "You're moving better than most newbies. Corey's a piece of work, though. Don't let him get you hurt." Troy leaned in slightly. "Is it always like that, skipping safety and pushing people like that?" Earl's jaw tightened. "Management don't care, they just want numbers. Corey gets bonuses for hitting targets, we don't." Troy's stomach churned. He remembered approving bonus programs meant to reward efficient teams, never imagining it would twist into this. Before he could respond, Mike stormed into the break room, clipboard in hand. "Lunch is over in 15, Mike barked. "Back on the floor double time, we got a rush order." Grumbling filled the room. Troy caught Ashley flinching at the sound. Back at line 3, the pace ramped up even more. Parts flew down the conveyor belt. Errors stacked up. Troy saw workers scrambling to fix mistakes on the fly. No inspections, no quality checks, just rush, rush, rush. Near the far end, a heavy-set man in his 40s, wearing a torn sweatshirt, struggled to lift a metal casing onto the assembly frame. His arms shook with the effort. Corey spotted him struggling and shouted across the noise. "Move it, Dan. You want everyone waiting on your lazy ass." Dan's face reddened with effort. He managed to shove the part into place, but dropped a bolt that clattered loudly on the floor. Corey rolled his eyes dramatically and stomped over. "You're useless," Corey said loud enough for the whole line to hear. "Maybe if you spent less time eating and more time working, we wouldn't be behind." A few workers looked down at their shoes. No one said anything. Troy's fists clenched by his sides. Abuse like that was beyond unacceptable. He forced himself to stay in character, but his mind burned with anger. Dan bent to pick up the bolt, his movements stiff and slow. Troy leaned toward him. "You okay?" Dan gave a small nod, not meeting his eyes. "Been here 8 years, he muttered. "They don't care." The day dragged on. Mid-afternoon, a tall woman with short-cropped hair and grease-streaked hands approached Troy while they were reloading the supply bins. "You're the new guy, right?" she asked, her voice steady. "Yeah, Travis." "I'm Jordan. Watch yourself. Corey's been worse lately. Ever since Mike started breathing down his neck about the quotas." Troy raised an eyebrow. "What's going on with Mike?" Jordan glanced around to make sure no one was close. "Corporate's been threatening cuts. Mike's desperate to make us look good. Corey's his attack dog." The pieces clicked together in Troy's mind. Pressure from above was crushing the people below. As the afternoon wore on, the air in the factory grew hotter, the fans overhead barely stirring. Workers moved like machines themselves, robotic and worn down. Troy noticed another problem. Supplies were running low. Bolts, brackets, even some key components weren't being restocked fast enough. Workers had to scavenge from other lines or improvise, creating dangerous conditions and rushed fixes. At one point, a bracket Troy needed wasn't available. He flagged Corey down. "We're out of brackets," Troy said, holding up the empty bin. Corey didn't even look. "Figure it out. Use whatever's close enough." "That's not safe," Troy said, louder than he intended. Corey's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, invading Troy's personal space. "You questioning me, rookie?" Troy stood his ground. "I'm saying if we use the wrong part, it could fail in the field." Corey sneered. "Not our problem once it ships." Troy's pulse hammered in his ears. He wanted to grab Corey by the collar and drag him straight to HR, but he had to finish what he started. He needed a full picture before he made his move. Understood, Troy said tightly. He improvised a safer workaround without compromising the build, earning a few quiet nods from nearby workers. Near the end of the shift, a minor incident erupted. A forklift, overloaded with parts, tipped slightly when the driver took a corner too fast. Metal pieces crashed to the floor with a deafening clatter. Workers scrambled out of the way. Mike stormed over, red-faced. "What the hell happened?" he shouted. The forklift driver, a young man no older than 20, looked pale. "I was trying to keep up. There's too many loads." Mike cut him off. "Excuses, clean this up. And if you're not faster by tomorrow, you're gone, understood." The young man nodded miserably. Troy's jaw ached from clenching it. Fear ruled this place. Fear of losing jobs, fear of injury, fear of retaliation. As the day finally ended, Troy clocked out with the others. Outside, dusk had fallen. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead. Workers limped to their cars, shoulders slumped. Ashley walked past him, still clutching her bruised apple. Her backpack hung from one shoulder, tattered and worn. "You did good today," she said quietly, almost like she was afraid to say it. "Thanks," Troy said. "You too." She gave a faint smile before hurrying off. Troy sat in his car for a long moment before starting the engine. His mind raced, cataloging everything he had seen. Unsafe practices, abusive management, exhausted workers cornered by impossible demands. This wasn't just a bad day, it was a broken system. Tomorrow, he would dig deeper. He needed to see how far the rot had spread. And then he would burn it down to the ground. The next morning, Troy sat in his truck watching workers file into the Southbridge factory under the dim, flickering overhead lights. His body ached from the previous day's grind, but the tension in his chest was heavier. Today wasn't about gathering evidence anymore. It was about confronting the truth and doing something about it. He pulled the worn cap lower over his forehead, grabbed his lunch pail, and headed inside. The factory floor buzzed with the same strained energy as before. Machines roared. Workers moved briskly, heads down. The air was thick with metallic dust. Troy clocked in and made his way to line 3. Corey was already shouting by the time Troy arrived. A pallet of parts hadn't been delivered on time, and he was berating a stock clerk in the middle of the floor. "You got one job, Paul. One, and you can't even get that right." Corey jabbed a finger into the air, his voice slicing through the noise. "Maybe we need someone who knows left from right." The stock clerk, a thin man with hunched shoulders, muttered an apology and shuffled off without making eye contact. Troy joined the line, grabbing his tools. Ashley worked 2 stations down, her expression unreadable as she adjusted a drill press. Jordan approached, her face set in a hard line. She leaned in close enough that only Troy could hear. "Mike's making rounds this morning. Corey's wound tighter than usual, just keep your head down." Troy nodded silently, his mind already racing. By mid-morning, Troy caught sight of Mike prowling through the aisles, clipboard clutched in one hand, a Bluetooth headset jammed into his ear. Every worker he passed stiffened visibly. He barked into the headset, rattling off numbers, his tone sharp and impatient. When he arrived at line 3, Corey straightened up like a soldier at inspection. "Production's behind," Mike snapped without preamble, scanning the half-finished assemblies. "We had supply issues," Corey said quickly, "and a couple of slowdowns." Mike's eyes narrowed. "Excuses. I want these numbers back up by end of shift, or I'll find someone who can get it done." He turned on his heel and stalked off before Corey could respond. Corey's face darkened. He turned back to the line, his jaw working furiously. "Double pace," he barked. No breaks till we're back on schedule. Murmurs of protest rippled through the line, but no one dared say anything outright. Troy's hands tightened around his wrench. Denying breaks was a clear violation of labor law, but Corey didn't seem to care. An hour later, disaster struck. Ashley, moving too quickly while trying to keep up, slipped on an oil slick near her station. She caught herself before falling completely, but her knee slammed hard against a metal bracket. She gasped in pain, clutching her leg. Troy dropped his tool and rushed over. "You all right?" he asked, crouching beside her. Ashley gritted her teeth, nodding tightly, but her face was pale. Corey didn't move. He crossed his arms and shouted from his spot. "Get up, we don't have time for theatrics." Troy stood slowly, his hands curling into fists. "She needs medical attention," Troy said, his voice low and dangerous. "She can walk it off," Corey said dismissively. Several workers had stopped what they were doing, watching the scene unfold. No one spoke. Troy helped Ashley to her feet. She winced but managed to stand. "We're going to the nurse," Troy said, daring Corey to stop him. Corey took a step forward, his mouth twisted into a sneer. "You leave your station, you're fired." Troy met his gaze steadily. "Then fire me." Silence fell over the line. Even the machine seemed quieter for a moment. Corey's eyes flickered uncertainly, but he said nothing. Troy guided Ashley carefully toward the small medical office near the back of the plant. The nurse, an older woman with a no-nonsense attitude, examined Ashley's knee and shook her head. "Swollen bad, she needs to get it checked out properly." Troy turned to Ashley. "You have someone who can take you to the doctor." She hesitated. "My car's in the shop. I took the bus." "I'll drive you," Troy said firmly. The nurse gave him a curious glance, but said nothing. Troy took Ashley out through the side door, away from prying eyes. In the parking lot, he helped her into his truck. They drove in silence for a few minutes before Ashley spoke. "Thanks," she said, her voice small. "Most folks here would have just looked the other way." "You shouldn't have to risk your health to keep a job," Troy said. Ashley stared out the window. "Doesn't feel like we have a choice." Troy didn't answer. His hands tightened on the wheel. At the urgent care clinic, he made sure Ashley was checked in before slipping back out. He couldn't blow his cover, yet not fully. Not until he finished what he had started. He returned to the factory just before lunch ended. Mike was waiting for him near the time clock, arms folded. "Where the hell have you been?" Mike demanded. "Medical emergency," Troy said evenly. Ashley fell. Mike's eyes narrowed. "Not your problem. Next time, tell Corey and get back to work." Troy held his gaze. Corey said to leave her. Mike stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You don't make the rules here, rookie. You follow orders." Troy's heart pounded, but he said nothing. Not yet. He turned and headed back to line 3. The rest of the shift was a brutal grind. Corey pushed the team harder, barking orders, threatening write-ups. Workers stumbled through their tasks, exhausted and demoralized. Mistakes piled up. Late in the afternoon, a critical assembly failed inspection. Jordan caught it just before it shipped out. "This bracket's wrong," she said, holding up the defective unit. Corey stormed over. "It's fine, ship it." Jordan shook her head. "If this fails in the field, it could cause a major accident." "I said ship it." Troy stepped in. "She's right, this could cause serious harm." Corey's face turned crimson. "You two want to find new jobs? Keep talking." Jordan didn't back down. "Do it by the book or I walk." Corey laughed harshly. "Go ahead, door's right there." Troy's decision crystallized in that moment. Enough was enough. He stepped forward, pulling off the battered cap and sunglasses he had worn. A ripple of confusion moved through the nearby workers. "My name's not Travis," Troy said, his voice carrying through the factory floor. "It's Troy Jensen. I own this company." The room froze. Machines still clattered in the background, but every pair of eyes turned toward him. Mike, who had been approaching from behind, stumbled to a halt. "You're fired," Troy said to Corey without hesitation. "Effective immediately." Corey's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "And you," Troy said, turning to Mike, "are done too. Clear your things. I want you both off my property in the next 10 minutes. Security will escort you." Mike tried to bluster. "You can't just—" Troy cut him off. "I can, and I just did." He turned to the workers, who stood frozen in shock. "No more cutting corners, no more abuse, no more working scared," Troy said. "Starting today, we rebuild this place the right way." A few workers exchanged glances. Jordan nodded subtly, her arms crossed. Troy took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. This wasn't the end of the fight. It was just the beginning. Troy stood in the middle of the factory floor, the sharp hum of machines blending into a low, tense murmur among the workers. Corey and Mike had already been escorted out, their protests swallowed by the heavy air of the warehouse. No one applauded, no one cheered. They simply watched, uncertain, as Troy turned toward them. He raised his voice to carry over the mechanical clatter. "I'm not here to make speeches. I'm here to fix what let go wrong." The workers shifted, exchanging wary glances. Jordan folded her arms across her chest, her face unreadable. Earl leaned slightly forward, his faded cap low over his eyes. Troy continued, "I saw firsthand what you deal with, and I'm not leaving it like this." He pointed to the line. "Effective immediately, we're stopping production for the rest of the day. We're going to have a meeting right here, right now." Gasps and mutters rippled through the crowd. Shutting down for even a few hours would cost money, and everyone knew it. Troy opened his arms. "If we don't get this place right, we're going to lose a lot more than a few hours." He walked to an empty workbench and hopped onto it, sitting casually but firmly. Workers slowly gathered around, uncertain but curious. "First," Troy said, "nobody gets punished for speaking up. If you see something unsafe, something wrong, you say it. Loud, and you'll be backed up, not fired." Ashley, leaning on crutches she had borrowed from the nurse's station, stood a little taller. "Second," Troy said, "we're putting in a new safety protocol. Full shutdowns for any repairs. No exceptions. I've already called corporate to send a full-time safety officer here by tomorrow." Jordan raised her hand slightly. Troy nodded at her. "What about the quotas?" she asked. "Mike and Corey pushed us so hard to meet them, we were cutting corners every day just to keep up." Troy nodded. "Quotas are being reevaluated. Starting now, quality and safety come first. If that means orders take longer to fill, so be it. I'll personally explain it to every client if I have to." A few workers exchanged surprised looks. No one had ever heard anyone from the top talk like that. Earl cleared his throat. "What about short staffing? We're running skeleton crews half the time." Troy leaned forward. "Already on it, we're hiring. Real hiring, not temp workers who get thrown away after a month. Full benefits, proper training." Earl gave a small nod, his expression softening. Troy scanned the group. "If any of you want to step up, there's opportunity too. We need new shift leads, new trainers. People who actually respect this place and the people in it." A murmur of cautious optimism moved through the group. Troy slid off the workbench and stood squarely in front of them. "I'm not going to pretend this fixes everything overnight. You've been pushed too hard for too long. It's going to take time to earn back trust. But I'm here. I'm staying involved. You won't be left to fend for yourselves again." He paused, letting the words settle. "I'll be working alongside you until we get it right. No more hiding in an office. The weight in the room shifted, lighter now but still tentative. A few workers nodded. Others looked thoughtful. No one clapped. No one cheered, but something stronger passed between them, a flicker of belief. Troy spent the rest of the day walking the floor, listening to workers' voice concerns he would have never heard filtered through layers of management. Jordan pointed out the faulty shelving in the parts warehouse. Earl showed him a broken lift that had been rigged instead of properly repaired. A young machinist named Leo explained how outdated software was causing frequent errors on the CNC machines. Each time, Troy listened, asked questions, and wrote everything down in a battered notepad he pulled from his pocket. No assistants, no handlers. Late in the afternoon, Troy gathered the supervisors, who remained a handful of quiet, competent people who had been overshadowed by louder, more aggressive managers like Mike and Corey. He met them in the break room. The vending machines still buzzed, the cracked plastic chairs still wobbled, but the atmosphere was different. "I'm not going to sugarcoat it," Troy said, standing at the front. "This place needs a complete culture shift, and it's going to be hard." He looked each of them in the eye. "I need leaders who care about their people, not just about numbers. If that's not you, tell me now, and we'll part ways with respect. No shame in it." No one spoke. Troy nodded. "Good, tomorrow we start retraining. Safety first, quality second, speed third." He turned to the whiteboard on the wall and started mapping out shifts, training schedules, and hiring needs. He assigned Jordan as interim floor manager for Line 3, trusting her experience and integrity. Earl agreed to mentor new hires. Leo volunteered to help overhaul the CNC systems. By evening, the factory had a plan, not perfect, not finished, but real. Troy locked up with the last few workers, the sun setting behind the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. He stood for a moment, looking at the building gray, battered, but still standing. The next morning began with a mandatory all-hands meeting. Workers gathered in the main warehouse, sitting on overturned crates and pallets. Troy stood in front of them, no microphone, no stage. "I'm not giving you promises," he said. "I'm giving you my word. We fix it together, or we don't fix it at all." The crowd listened, silent but attentive. "And one last thing," Troy added, his voice steady. "Anyone caught bullying, cutting corners, or abusing their coworkers will be out the door. No warnings, no negotiations." He let the words hang in the air. "You deserve better. You're going to get it." Over the next weeks, true change took root. New hires came in, properly trained and supported. Safety drills became routine instead of rare. Workers were encouraged to suggest improvements and saw those suggestions implemented. Production slowed at first, but quality soared, and soon clients noticed. Orders increased not because of rushed quotas, but because word spread. Southbridge made parts that you could trust. Ashley returned after her knee healed, not to the assembly line, but to a new position in quality control, where her sharp eye could prevent mistakes before they happened. She walked with a slight limp, but her smile was stronger than ever. Jordan officially accepted the role of floor manager after a probationary period, leading with fairness and firmness. Earl, who had once thought about quitting altogether, stayed on, his quiet authority respected more than ever. Troy kept his promise. Twice a week, he came to Southbridge in work boots and jeans, walking the floor, checking machines, eating lunch with the crew. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. The factory wasn't perfect. It still struggled some days, but it was alive again, fueled by dignity instead of fear. Troy Jensen had built his company once with his hands. Now, he was rebuilding it with his heart.